Ben, are we started? Oh, we're live. Wow. All right. Sneak attack. Here we go. Hey, everybody. How's it going? We are here today to talk about a very, very important vote. So either you're watching this live or you're going to be watching this recorded later. But this is a huge, huge moment for the SKALE network. Got some other people here. Sawyer from Dirt Road Dev, one of the, I'd say, foremost community developers contributing to the SKALE project. We've got Artem here, who's head of developer success on the SKALE Labs team. Connor, who is head of sales and strategy. So a lot of the kind of model and network modeling stuff has fallen into his hands. He'll be here to talk about that as well. So, all right, everybody. I actually created some slides because sometimes I think slides help because this is some complex. It's fairly complex topic, okay? So give me 1 second as I move over here. While I do that, Sawyer, why don't you start by just kind of giving everyone a little summary of where we are in terms of, this vote being active, what the deadline is, and just some super high level, and then I'll jump into the slides.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me on to help talk about this and support as we continue to move this forward as a community. Where we're at today is pretty exciting. So we're actually right around the halfway mark, I believe, in the vote itself happening on Snapshot for SKALE Chain pricing to actually be passed in its current proposal form. And so what that means is if the vote is successful and we get, we reach quorum, which means we have enough votes from people that have delegated and voted for this individual proposal. What that means is come January 1st, SKALE Chain pricing and fees will actually go live on the Europa SKALE Chain. And what that means is the chain owners will be able to start paying in renting their chains, with the first deadline to effectively pay in for being February 1st. And so it's a pretty exciting time to kind of be involved in all this, since we're moving closer and closer toward that, long-term sustainable model.
Awesome. Okay, here we go. I'm going to share screens. All right. Sorry. Okay, there we go. Entire screen. Okay, good. We're using StreamYard, which is not, I'd say, our typical screen sharing tool. So can you see my screen?
I don't see any presentation, Jack.
Okay, we're going to try that again. How about now? Maybe we can get a response from, it says it's sharing a window. There we go. Okay, just a little buggy. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right, everybody. Sorry for the delay. Let's get going. So today we've got an FAQ to run through. I know this is a pretty complex topic. One of the most challenging pieces is describing this in a way that's, understandable. Well, it has to have some sophistication in order for it to work well. Okay. So today we're going to be covering a few main questions that keep coming up from a lot of you in the community. Well, how is it that SKALE doesn't have gas fees and it can still capture value at the network level? So we're going to start very high level. Then we're going to get into dynamic chain pricing. How does dynamic chain pricing work in SKALE? What is the right price for a chain? How does the payment model function within SKALE? Like, how do the actual mechanics work that have been submitted for the proposal? And then why are validators getting the initial payments? And when will phase 3 commence? Phase 2 and phase 3, which is a common question. Okay. So gas fees, why do they exist? So I'm going to start simple, just because I think we've got a wide range of the community listening here today. So one, gas fees are great because one, it's just a payment for validation. It's a payment to utilize for block space. It also does support by adding load balancing. So if everyone wants gas to have a transaction process at the same time, well, then it'd be really slow. So that's why gas fees fluctuate, because if you pay more, you can step to the front of the line. And if you don't want to pay more, you have to wait or just have a lower fee and hopefully it gets picked up later. Okay. And it also prevents spam and DOSing. So the network getting overloaded with requests. Well, when you have to pay for things, it's a way to make sure there's not nefarious attacks, because the cost of that attack will be high enough to just keep spamming something within it. That's why gas fees are really valuable. All right. So, okay. So gas fees. Well, why are they bad? Well, one, they penalize users for doing what you want them to do. You want them to use more of the product. And so the more they use it, the more you penalize them because they have to pay. As opposed to in most products, the more you use something, the less you pay, you get more of a discount. You get unit economic discounts and economies of scale. So they end up being a growth inhibitor, gas fees do. And they also add unpredictability. So if you have a gas fee, it's very unpredictable and it causes issues for end users and applications. And the other thing is oftentimes gas fees are just the fee. They're not proportionate to the size of the transaction. And so it's very different than most fees. Usually fees, if you have a small purchase, the fee's small. If you have a big purchase, the fee is higher. Well, with gas fees, it doesn't care what the size of the transaction or value of the transaction is. And so sometimes someone's minting, let's say they're minting an NFT worth $3 and they have a, 30-cent gas fee. Well, that's proportionally a very big fee. Let's say they have a $3 gas fee for a $2 NFT. Well, that's really doesn't make sense. Okay. So gas fees have a lot of issues that just frankly, we figured out in prior versions of the internet. And so when SKALE was created, we thought, how do we help create a system that can solve for the issues of gas fees, but also solve for the reasons why gas fees exist? So one issue with the current model is that blockchains effectively are monetizing end users via applications. So they're selling block space to end users. So if you look at a layer one tip, and hey, this is great for Ethereum because Ethereum's this foundational chain, and not every small transaction should be on Ethereum. That's why layer twos exist and layer 2+ systems like SKALE exist. But at the end of the day, blockchains are are monetizing users. And so that's why you see a lot of these chains giving these huge grants to apps because they just want the users to pay the fees, right? And so that model is broken when you look at infrastructure. If you take an Uber ride, you're not having to pay, Uber and pay a server fee on top of it that, is highly fluctuating and unpredictable. Typically, applications are absorbing the cost of infrastructure fees. Now, SKALE thought, well, how can we do that with a zero gas model that doesn't sacrifice decentralization, doesn't sacrifice security, doesn't sacrifice economic value capture for a token? Okay. And so the way it does it is that applications have to pay, and applications are effectively renting space in the chain. They're not, the blockchain is not monetizing the end user. The blockchain monetizes at the application level. And guess what? The applications could still charge a user a transaction fee, but it could be in accordance to the size of their transfer. They could capture money in different ways and capture value in other ways. And just like you would pay a cloud hosting fee, Google Cloud or AWS, there's ways that you capture value at the app level that bring assets back to the blockchain or bring value capture back to the blockchain. I think so SKALE, instead of gas fees, has chain fees and unified validation. So applications are paying for space in the chain, regardless if they use it a lot or a little. They have to pay for their component. It's like you rent there's a 10-bedroom apartment and there's 10 dApps. Well, I pay 1/10 of the monthly rent because I have 1/10 of the apartment space. Okay. Maybe I don't even sleep in that apartment for the month, or I sleep there every night, but I still have to pay the same amount because I'm renting the space and it has a certain amount of utility for me. Okay. We still have to prevent spam and DOSing. So SKALE has something called S-Fuel. It's a scarcity gas token. So it doesn't cost money, But if you have a spammer who's just pinging the network, they're going to run out of this S fuel. And there's things that we can do, that developers can do with proof of works and other mechanisms to make sure those are users getting S fuel and getting the right amount, as opposed to robots. Okay. And hey, the developer could even sell S fuel if they want it. It's, you know, or sell it to applications at a DAO level if someone was starting a chain that way. There's a lot of things, a lot of ways you could use S fuel. We're at the very early days of innovation of how you use S fuel. But the goal is, with S fuel, stop spamming, make sure the chain doesn't get too overloaded and it can have high performance. Okay, so there's two ways the network does load balancing. One, S fuel, but two, making sure that there's a right amount of chains to applications. And let's use the apartment example. If I have an apartment of 10 people and I've got 9 of the rooms, you know, rented, I only have 1 left and 10 people want a room, well, that's an issue. Well, guess what? Scale is basically a new scale chain, is like a new apartment building. Oh, just set up a new apartment building. And guess what? The price for that 10th apartment, if you only had 1 left, is going to be really high if you own a building, right? Because you're like, hey, I only have 1 left. I'm going to increase the price. But if you open a new chain, well, there's more market supply. Or you open a new apartment, there's more market supply. All of a sudden, there's 9 apartments and there's 11 free ones, 9 rented, 11 free ones. Well, hey, you know, the supply demand ratio got pushed down. Okay. And so that's how scale chains work. They work a lot like renting an apartment. And the other thing is, instead of validators getting paid to validate each chain, they actually validate the block as a group, and they do something called unified validation. So what happens is validators are working as a team and they get paid at the month, not by each block. And that's why the unit economics can be good. Because imagine for an apartment, if you had to charge per second that you're in there and you have all these people coming in and out of the apartment and, you know, paying to sleep there each night. It's like a hotel, right? Hotels have crazy rates. Apartments cost less than hotels because an apartment, people know they can rent for a long period of time. The supply and demand is, you know, way less volatile because of, you know, the monthly rental system, and the amount of people living in the city is like more clear. Hotels go up and down in value because the amount left is always fluctuating. The amount of time people are there is very short. And so the unit economics of hotels are not as good for renters as a unit economic of an apartment. Okay. But also means you have to commit longer. All right. And so what happens is these validators all operate a node, and they're going to receive a score of 0 or 1 based off their accuracy, their performance, their uptime, their latency, their bandwidth, and more. Okay. And that score right now, well, as soon as slashing gets turned on, that score will come from a decentralized SLA algorithm where each node is randomly monitoring 5 other nodes. And at the end of the day, the top 5th and the bottom 5th of the scores are wiped out, and the middle 5th of the scores will be there. Assuming based off of the consensus that 2/3 of the nodes are good actors. And if you take that assumption, then these 2/3 of nodes would also be supplying accurate scores into the score, and we could remove the top and the bottom scores. Okay. And then what happens is, let's say there's 100 nodes working and all 100 of them have a great score. They all get a 1. Well, then they all split the bounty pot that month by 100. Okay. That bounty pot is created by fees in the chain combined with inflation. Okay. And so what happens is that all the way down to the root of scale consensus, it is built for chain fees. It's not just a gas fee model and you pay per month and that ends up paying retroactively the amount of units validated. And so we're really, you know, these chain renters are like landlords renting from the city of Scale, and you know, however many apartment buildings are there is really an economic factor. And the price of them is an economic factor, just like economics in the Scale network. So I'm going to stop here for a second, and we're going to go back to the FAQ before we dig into the nuts and bolts of the FAQ. But before I do, I just want to ask Connor, Artem, Sawyer, any thoughts on what I just said, and maybe as a segue into the next section?
Yeah, I can hop in there. I think the big thing within this is just, in general, Scale's architecture and how the multi-chain architecture allows for this unified validation that I think intuitively makes a lot of sense when we think about successful Web2 companies and just scaling in general. But for some point, blockchain to this point hasn't gone that route. I think it's because we followed just traditional, starting with Bitcoin being proof of work, and then even when Ethereum used to be proof of work, and people just thought that charging the end user made sense. And at the initial sense of what blockchain started as, I think it does. From a security standpoint, a lot of reasons it still holds true. But when we start to think about end user cases like gaming, like AI, like social, and more that are going to continue to matriculate over time, then it doesn't really make sense for hitting hundreds of millions or billions of users. And that's what gaming has 3.3 billion of users, and it's never going to work by charging that end user. So this is just Scale's approach and getting to a point that those unit economics can be passed on to that end user level.
Yeah, it's a good point that this started with consensus, Nakamoto consensus with Bitcoin. And then, there really wasn't an evolution beyond then because people just said, hey, this security model works and this price model works. But, and it does work really well for Bitcoin, and it works really well for the Ethereum foundational level network, but it doesn't work well for high, global mass adoption transaction execution. Okay. All right, well, let's get into these questions. Okay, so summary of the proposal. Sawyer, Artem, do one of you guys want to talk through the proposal summary that's being voted on? People can talk maybe too about where people can find these proposals, both in the forum and Snapshot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we'll start out there. So right now, if you go to forum.scale.network, you'll see a kind of a list of different proposals and questions and things asked. That top link there is going to take you right to the proposal for the current vote. And within that proposal, you'll see kind of the initial proposal that I had put out, as well as a number of different, question responses and things like that from different developers, validators, and just different entities throughout the community that have chimed in and raised their voice on, positive, negative, whatever it may be, as well as the kind of follow-up technical spec that Artem had posted to help kind of solidify how this can actually come to fruition on chain. From there, that is then linked to the Scale DAO snapshot. So snapshot is a fairly common voting platform that enables on-chain governance, right? So it utilizes the SKALE token on Ethereum mainnet for voting. So if you go to, I don't know it off the top of my head, so I won't say it just to not put anybody in a precarious situation here. But if you go to the snapshot website and you search for Scale DAO, you'll be able to see there's an active vote right now. And if you're a delegator to the Scale network, you'll actually be able to go in and raise your voice and say yes, say no, abstain, whatever you feel in favor of this vote. Into the actual summary of it. So the proposal right now in the vote in US per month in SKALE per Scale chain, right? So that means every Scale chain would be required to pay this amount. It's not, network summed, it's every chain individually. Additionally, every proceed from this is planned to go to the validators entirely for the first 6 months. This is done on purpose. This is designed to help the validators come toward that kind of hardware profitability or hardware stability, at least, as soon as possible. And then that will be, that'll effectively stay with the validators until a subsequent vote comes and determines that some of those payment fees should be diverted elsewhere. For example, toward the kind of like the bounty pool or the general, delegator pool, as Jack, you mentioned earlier. Additionally, the chains can be paid for up to 24 months in advance as per this first vote. And so once again, that enables developers and chain owners to find stability as soon as possible. If there's a large demand out of the gate for people that want to buy Scale chains, and we reach closer and closer to that 50% utilization mark, SKALE Chain owners will have the ability to prepay at this lower price and lock in their compute for up to 2 years, which is very nice from that unit economic standpoint. And then the payments themselves, I mentioned this kind of at the start. The goal here is, with a successful vote, hopefully, the payments will start on January 1st, and chain owners will have to pay in by February 1st. Come February 1st, if you have not paid in as a chain owner, you'd be considered out of compliance. And then come March 1st, that's the first month that validators will actually be able to start withdrawing those fees and those payments if they're compliant. And then lastly, just the Europa SKALE Chain again. We have this incredible zero gas fee environment within the SKALE network today. And the goal is to utilize this Europa SKALE Chain to actually make these payments and make these withdrawals. That way, the validators and the different entities within the network that are transferring and doing the different items required to do SKALE Chain pricing, they don't have to be consistently hit with high gas fees. They can just focus on doing what they have to do to procure their chain. And then phase 2, we're in the process right now of kind of starting out this phase 2 and working toward the sustainable scale ecosystem.
Yeah, let me add one more thing, that the payments are made on Europa SKALE Chain. It's a very critical strategic thing which we decided to do, because at SKALE we developing cool features for SKALE Chain owners. For example, SKALE Connect, which is built in Oracle. And in the future, it would help us to solve the decentralized SLA problem. So basically, with the Oracle, we can better understand and SLA all the validators to achieve this unified validator model.
Awesome. Yeah. And the thing is, we're going to, as this grows and grows and grows, we have more and more delegators, more and more nodes, more and more chain fees. That also ends up being huge amounts of TVL and utilization and use on Europa, as well as very zero fee transactions, because these contracts are complicated. Okay, and they'd be really, if anyone's claimed staking fees on the ETH mainnet, it can be expensive. I think they were, they're usually $10, $15, $20 in USD value, but ETH's been up. And last week I saw one, it was like $150. It was just a very peak moment. It was back down. But, to make this affordable, all of these, this collection point will happen over in Europa, and then we'll help feed the Europa DeFi ecosystem. And I think, excited about a lot of DeFi that's happening there. Also, this is just a interim. It's supposed to be a 6 to 12 month plan, phase 2, and then ultimately would go to phase 3. Okay, which will be even bigger and better. And really the goal of phase 3 is to get to the point of economic value capture to really drive value to delegators and validators and grow the economic security of the network, while making sure the price is still competitive to win deals with applications. But it serves applications well to have the token be utilized and to have to pay, because it means more security for them, more stability. Okay, so it's a little counterintuitive. You think as a developer, you're like, oh, I want the price as low as possible, but if it's too low, you don't get the security of the network. Okay, because the token doesn't capture value. All right. So scale chain demand, as demand grows for chains, the goal is that the supply grows and it keeps pushing the price down. I've got a better view of what this looks like. So I'm using just some random numbers. 100,000 scale is just something I came up with. But, and so let's say the network is at 20% load. Let's say there could be 100 chains. 20 of 100 chains in the network are being rented. We're at 20% load. Well, in this case, then it's 100,000 tokens to rent a chain. And, if you rent the 20th first chain. But the price for subsequent chains has changed. And let's say it's an apartment building and I only had 100 units to rent. Well, when I'm renting my 50th unit, I'm saying, hey, I only have 50 of these left, so I'm gonna charge less for the first 50 to try to, get people in here because no one's living here yet. Now the price is going up because I have less supply. Now a medium one, then based off this curve, the 51st chain would cost 150,000. Now, when you pay for that, that's per month. So you could pay up to 12 months in advance, 24 months in advance, or you just pay every month. But your price will fluctuate based off the load dynamics and the price of SKALE to USD every month, unless you want to lock it in. So some businesses are saying, hey, I don't want this unpredictability. I'll buy, if my chain costs X amount per month, great. I'm going to pay for 2 years up front. And in 2 years, I'll lock in more pricing. Or maybe in a year and a half, I'll buy another 6 months to keep locking that in if I think the price is good then. Okay, so there's 100, right? Again, the network could have 100 chains based off the amount of nodes. It costs that. That's this middle point price. Well, guess what? We're at 80%. We have hardly any nodes left. Now we're getting overloaded. We're going to have congestion. What do we do? Well, it's just really expensive. Well, guess what happens? I think, people, the network, the token's like, wow, look at how many chains have been rented. This token's obviously doing a good job securing the network. The technology is doing a good job helping the applications. There's high demand and there's more value capture for the token. More people want to run more nodes. Sorry, that should have said 100 on the bottom right. It should have said 100 chains. That wasn't updated. But now 60 more chains joined the network. Before we had 100 chains. Now we have 60 more. What it did, it pushed the price down because our utilization now is 80 of 150. The next chain, the 81st chain, will only be 1,000 because we have more supply, okay? So the goal is that the network never gets over 60 or 70% congestion because it's always more profitable at that point to set up more nodes, and the minimum stake rate can be dropped, which then incentivizes, makes validators run more nodes. So there's these things that can happen that are going to keep pushing the price down, but the network can really shift based off of, the supply and demand, okay? And in SKALE, we have the ability to create, it's like apartment buildings. We can create another building. Now we have double the amount of units to rent, but we're renting them to dApp developers, and they're, instead of apartments, they're space in a chain, okay? All right. So you guys want to add to that before we move on to some actual price proposal elements?
Yeah, I can hop in there. What I love about this model is it's taking on just, best practices of market dynamics in general. And so, at least for me, when I was getting up to speed on how this would be and explaining it to folks, it's really simple to think of it in terms of what we do on a daily basis. And a lot of folks probably use Uber. And so this works, the same way from a chain standpoint as in cars. And, when there's a lot of drivers out there and not many riders, the fares are relatively cheap. And then as that starts to get full, or there's a reason why, there's a ton of demand, be it New Year's Eve or a football game or whatever it may be, then prices start to increase. And the natural inclination after that is that instead of just prices getting to a point where they're astronomical, it actually just entices more people to drive. And you've probably seen this. I know people who drive for Uber, and they plan out driving at night because they know that people are out going to restaurants or bars or whatever it may be, and they know there's higher demand. This works the same way. So as the price starts to increase and all of these validators are making more money, those individual validators start to spin up more nodes, just like driving more cars, or new validators come on board because of the amount of activity. And this is just a push and pull in the market that gets to a point of essentially this medium equilibrium, ideally never really getting to either of the dramatic ends of it.
Yeah, and so let's use Connor's example of Uber. Let's say everyone's like, you know what? I'm not driving during the day. I don't make enough money. I'm going to drive at night. And then all of a sudden there's all these drivers out at night. There's no surge pricing. And then during the day, all of a sudden, there's not enough drivers and people are waiting. Well, guess what? There's more people that want to ride than people that are driving. And then there's going to be surge pricing. And people are, oh, I'm going to drive during the day. Not enough. No one's out during the day. And then they're making more money during the day. But then if there's, too many out during the day, too many people think that at the same time, well, then there's way too many drivers, not enough rides. You're not getting as many rides. And so the market demand will balance the supply based purely off of economics and market functions. And that's the same thing will happen here. People, stake and run nodes because it's profitable and run more nodes because it's profitable based off of, a very similar market aspects, much different use case and scenario, but similar high order market economic functions. Okay. So let's talk about what should the chain price be. Now in phase one, the goal was, hey, each chain is going to cost in scale $33,600 a month. Just keep it really simple. There's one price until the network gets at 50% load and then it hits the curve. Okay. But in phase three, the goal will be to have, even at 50% and a little lower, a different price curve. Okay. And so if we look at this and we look at the application and we look at, let's say there's one application in the network, let's say one scale, just to set context. And this, by the way, the job of the core team is not to set pricing. We're trying to help give people insights. And for phase three, there will be hopefully, dApp developers and or validators coming together to propose pricing. Okay. And here we've interviewed 1 million of them, and Sawyer as a developer is taking the lead and pushing this forward. But let's say one scale chain, it can do 397, 400 transactions per second, something like that, based off the Dartmouth study. That's about 1 billion transactions a month at full bore, just, boom, 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 boom. Now, we know that the world doesn't work that way. You don't always have max capacity each transaction, but just it's a good point to know, like full speed based off the Dartmouth study, what could a chain do? So let's say I have one app that just rents a chain entirely on their own, and the price is 500,000 USD a year, paid in SKALE tokens. Well, my monthly price per application with one chain is going to be $41,600 in SKALE tokens. Okay, and in my transactions per application would be 1 billion. Okay, so you've got to be a really big app. But I'll tell you, even like the SKALE Labs core team, just paying for different test nets we run, we'll often spend 20, 25,000 a month on server costs just to run test nets. So if you think about it, for an application and high-powered application, they spend a ton of money on cloud fees. This is still very reasonable. Okay. And for a big enterprise, I think, if they would want to rent a large chain, not just a medium one, their budgets are way, way higher. Okay. But this is just for medium chains. Let's say we have 10 apps on a chain, and my monthly price per application then would be 4,000 a month for 10 apps. And, still getting to do 100 million transactions a month per app if we split it up equally. Okay. That's still high for small teams, but that's really reasonable for any sort of, team that's got any sort of venture funding. Okay. If you think about how much you'd pay if you're subsidizing transaction fees at 5 cents, 4 cents a transaction, and you're doing lots of transactions, that's, the unit economics are dramatically better at this. 100 applications splitting a chain at 500K, $416 a month. Like, that's super reasonable. So you could see community chains that have lots of apps sharing a chain, and it's really cost effective. Okay. It's not that expensive. If you had 1,000, it'd only be $4 a month. Now there'd be much more issues in terms of like really using S-Fuel effectively for load balancing. There'd be like, I think, more technological innovation in S-Fuel, and which isn't hard. It's just more operational strategies. And I'm excited to see that come, and see like even SDKs for S-Fuel that you could pop up to do optimized load balancing with 1,000 dApps in a chain. There also at some point will be nano chains, I hope, in the Scale network, where like super small chains exist that are $10, $20 a month. But that's, that doesn't exist today. We just have medium chains. Does exist, but not live. I mean, it's just a vote would need to push forward to make that live. Now let's say each chain is $1 million a month. At 100 chains, it's only 833 USD value in Scale, which, are 100 apps on one chain, getting 10 million transactions. Your cost per transaction is super low. Okay. And so who knows what the price will be? Other people will vote, not us, but I think, there's, the market will figure this out through voting and the voice of dApp developers, the voice of validators, the voice of delegators. But I look at this range and it all seems very reasonable. And even if we're 2 million and 50 dApps, it's $833 a month, if you change those parameters. If at 1 million a chain and, there's 500 chains, the network then is capturing good token economic value that goes back into security of the network, and it goes back into performance of the network. And the revenue, as a reminder, goes all to validators and stakers. And so anybody who's staking gets to participate in this, value capture or decentralized revenue streams that, are produced through this proof of stake system. Okay. So just wanted to show this as an example, high level of the whole gamut of options. I think we'll see a lot, who knows, maybe we're off. Maybe it'll be, block space will be super valuable and it'll be 5 million a year per chain. But we thankfully, just need to make sure we have good systems to change that and flow with market demand as a community around Scale, and then have a good on-chain voting mechanism, which we have today. Okay, thoughts from the team here? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah.
One of the FAQs, right? Sawyer, people are like, what? $1 million a chain? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Divided by 100, it's 100 apps.
Yeah.
Unreasonable.
No, absolutely. And I think just something that's super important to kind of acknowledge is, at the most important component of this is to create this sustainable ecosystem, right? Where there's incentive for the validators to, run the nodes and provide this compute, but there also needs to be, developers that want to rent this compute, right? And so it's important to understand that, even looking at the one on the right, $1 million per chain a year sounds like such a large number when you first see it. But what you don't really realize is you can fit so many projects on these chains. If you can do on average, 10 million transactions per day, or even higher potentially, whatever it's going to be. Most dApps in the world today are doing, anywhere between a couple hundred to a few thousand transactions per day. And so for a lot of the shared Scale chains, there's the potential to fit way more than 100 projects, right? Potentially fit 1,000 projects and really raise the value of these unit economics. But what's even cooler is outside of just the compute, you also get the scalability of just a sustainable kind of development operations cloud, quote unquote, right? Instead of you having to worry about setting up servers and worrying about how to spread data availability around the world and all this stuff, it's just there by default when you utilize a Scale chain. And so I think it's just super important to note that from a development standpoint, if you're looking for compute, whether it's EVM or even just normal compute, there's more than just good economics here for a developer. There's also great scalability, fantastic speed, and a lot of really fantastic features to kind of to push on top of that.
Great point, Sawyer. So let's step back a little bit. I think that sums up the presentation. Again, the goal is with this vote, all of a sudden validators are operating at the network runs at profitability, not big profitability, but really a net neutral state. It's not burning, there's more payment than the cost to run it. Okay. Which I think is a huge milestone for any blockchain. And then the next phase will be about value capture, which, brings value to the whole ecosystem. So this is a great stepping stone, especially given the current parameters of the market and competition. Want to bring it back to the rest of the team and make sure we got all the FAQs so that people can go vote. Anything else, team? One other thing is, let's say someone doesn't, let's say an application, a bunch of applications don't pay their fee. Okay. Let's say there's a really successful app for 6 months. There's lots of NFTs on there. Well, one idea that was brought forth by the developer community was that there will be the first and last month payment are paid up front. And if you don't pay and you're out of compliance, well, your last month's payment goes to helping transfer the assets. And then it helps pay to move those assets to another chain, and it helps pay. Now, it's not going to have the entire state bloat of every transaction, but what we want is to move this lean state, ledger of who owns what. And that would get ported and transferred. Now, that code isn't built to do that transfer yet, but that is a very strong ask, because the thing about blockchain is you want to protect end users from applications, and you want to give people sovereignty over their assets. But you also don't want to have them pay absurd fees and be the payers of all infrastructure. So one way around this is to have a immutability plan to always be able to, get any sort of chain that dies, get the core value and end state somewhere else, so that end users are protected and immutability is protected.
Absolutely. I would just say on that front, it's something that we've been kind of going back and forth with a number of the different hub chain owners, different app developers with, because it is a really difficult kind of area to wrap your head around at first, right? There's a lot when it comes to, well, blockchains are supposed to be immutable. What happens if someone can't pay for their SKALE chain? I think that's where kind of the hub setup today in the SKALE ecosystem is going to really benefit the app chain kind of desire, right? If you want your app chain today, but then 6 months from now you can't pay for it, you have NFTs or other items that need to survive because they're owned by people. The great part about SKALE is all these chains can be connected directly with zero gas fees. And so even though we may not have a permanent state backup plan today, your prepayment of that last month allows for potentially a direct migration to a hub chain, right? For example, to make sure that those users can pick up right where they left off and kind of proceed in that direction, while we continue to work with all the different parties involved to find ways to continuously protect and make sure the users have the things that are theirs long term.
Okay, other thoughts from the team? Okay, what's the deadline? Is it for the votes to come through? Because I think there's probably going to be a big surge of votes happening, and a lot of people are waiting for this presentation today. So
I believe it's Friday morning. Friday morning Pacific. I don't know the exact time in UTC. Apologies. I'm not good with the UTC. It should be, there we go, December 8th, 2023, 7:30 a.m. PST. So a few days from now.
7:30 a.m. PST?
Correct. Is when it closes on the dot.
All right. Well, let's hopefully I'm curious to see what happens. I think, I'm hearing good things. So it'll be awesome to see a big turnout on this vote. And it's a very critical vote. And I think it's, puts validators in a really strong position to kick off, the new year, and, puts the network in a really strong position to keep growing and, gaining more economic value capture, which always, is a main proxy to security of the network.
Yeah, and please join the conversation in the forum. So as you're voting, you can hop in there with suggestions, ideas, feedback, as this is community owned and we'll be continuing to iterate on it. So it's just, part of this entire process.
Okay. All right. Okay, everybody. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day. Bye.